Okay, perfect. So I'll just give you a quick recap. I'm assuming everybody can see the presentation I put on screen. We're kind of split time between this presentation deck, and then we'll break out and have a 10-minute screen share where I actually show you an automation and the steps inside it and one of the tools we use called Zapier. We'll get started now. Obviously, it's a minute past. If people join, I'll just add them in at the same time. There's a live chat. Obviously, if people got microphones and they want to ask questions, we'll have a Q&A at the end. But other than that, obviously, I'll get started and let me know if you guys have any issues. But I think we're good to go. So 100-hour workshop. We put this together because we do a lot of automation at the minute, or we start to do a lot of automation with clients. And I think the client base we speak to don't always know what's accessible or what's available right now. So the idea of this workshop is you spend a little bit of time with me on the call right now, you'll learn a bit about automation, and you'll be able to go away and use that knowledge to create some automations in your own processes or business, which will ultimately give you time back week on week or day on day. So quick agenda for what we're going to run through, a real brief overview of Everon and me. Then we'll quickly discuss automation. I'll give you some examples of things we've done for clients or tools that you can use. We'll then jump into what it actually takes to create an automation. So from actually mapping the process to actually making an automation live. And then we'll kind of wrap up with kind of some ideas and inspiration that I can give you to go away and make your own automations or places you might get started. And then we'll end with a Q&A. So as I say, any questions we've got, throw them in the chat or shout out at the end. And obviously I'll spend some time answering questions. So to get kind of the bit about us out of the way, we are a services company specializing in IT, cloud, Microsoft 365, and kind of continual improvements, one of our ethos. So things like automation perfectly fit within the remit of what we try and deliver to clients. We were founded in 2008. The business has changed quite a lot since then. So we kind of did a little bit of everything to everyone. We were more of a traditional approach back then. And then late 2016, 2017, went for a management buyout. Myself and my current business partner then really niched down the business. We started focusing on specific areas or verticals. We've been steadily growing since then. And then, as I say, we kind of branching out to do things like automation as well as the kind of standard IT support. A little bit about me and my background. So I started in 2003. I've done some Cisco courses and certifications, Microsoft, Google, and things like that along the way. One sort of achievement I'm proud of, I was on the Insider magazine's 42 Under 42 to Watch in 2020. I'm a co-owner of Everon, and basically my role right now, as we've grown over the last few years, is to basically speak to new clients, speak to existing clients, and make sure that we're always at the forefront of technology and we're always adopting new technologies as we go. We have a team of people that will deliver the automations and do that sort of stuff, but I'm kind of the face, for now at least, of what we do. So to move forward then, what is automation? So people will have heard automation, and if you haven't heard it recently, it's something that's going to become more and more popular throughout 2023. Things like ChatGPT, I don't know if people have heard of, but it is kind of the buzzword within our industry. It's the next big thing, especially with the AI and sentiment-backed technologies that are coming along. So I think if you're not already using it, now is a perfect time to start using it, or at least get some exposure to it and start learning about it. So when we talk about automation, what is it? So IBM defined automation as the application of technology, programs, and robotics or processes to achieve outcomes with minimal human input. It sounds probably more technical than it is, or more complicated than it is. Ultimately, as a rule of thumb, we basically say anything that's a repetitive task or we can standardize, automation can now take that process over from a human being. There's lots. Hi, Lynn. There's lots of different kind of systems and processes. Sorry, I'll just mute you, Lynn, if that's okay. There's lots of different types of automation, and people think automation is such a new concept. but there's really simple things that you'll be used to already that you probably just never realize is automation. So something that everybody no doubt will have used on this is out of office replies on your Outlook. Essentially, by the kind of definition, that's an automation. So when you go on holiday, you set a rule up in your Outlook that says when out external email comes in, this is the reply to give. I turn it on at this time and you automatically stop sending it at this time. So as a real basic example of an automation that everybody should be familiar with, that's exactly that. Obviously, there's much more complex things it can do. You have the other end of the extreme where you've got like Jeff Bezos in Amazon warehouses, and we've got fully like robotic automation warehouse lines and things like that, where not only are the technology and the software elements automated, but we actually have robots that go now and collect the different elements and move them down the production line. So I think you've got two extremes. We obviously start more in that kind of middle sector because you've got predefined apps like your out of office and stuff like that that you'll already be using and the categorize as automation. We're probably a little bit out of reach of having a fully like robotic system for the time being, but there's quite a few really easy wins, and we'll obviously move on to some examples of those shortly. But I think it's important to know that automation and this sort of technology is here to stay. There is probably some negatives around obviously the replacement of staff and removing jobs from people, but I think it's important that we need to be aware that this, regardless of how you feel about that side of things, is going to be here and it's here to stay and it's only going to get more prevalent. So probably the attitude we all need to adopt a little bit more of is how can we redeploy people? How can we redeploy the human touch? So kind of one thing I talk about with clients is we can teach a computer to do a set process, but we can never teach it like great customer service, or we can never teach it a real personal touch. So some of the client work we do, rather than kind of remove job roles or make people redundant, we aim to try and redeploy that person's time in an area where technology is still not that far advanced. So deliver someone a really seamless automation and from a technical perspective, but then redeploy that person's time to do that personal touch. So those phone calls that maybe a computer can't make right now, that kind of learning about a client and then delivering something really personalized and specific to that client, rather than just using a person to take data from one system and input it to another, and take data from the next call and put it to another, which is easily something a computer can do now. So I think there's kind of two sides to it, and we need to obviously just be aware of it's maybe a sensitive topic depending on your industry. I know with ChatGPT specifically, this is, if you haven't heard of it, it's a new sort of natural language AI where you can literally ask questions. You can ask it to type blog posts and content, and it will create it within seconds. And I know a lot of content writers I speak to, they're really worried about how this is going to impact them. But I think it's key that people have to find a way to work with this technology, because it's only going to become more and more prevalent, as I say. So what are some of the benefits? I kind of touched on a few bits there. Ultimately, a computer, once we've defined a process and that process is sort of successful and it works, there's going to be very little errors within it. A PC won't make different choices every time. It won't ever make the same choice based on logic. You can help reduce employee workload and improve productivity. So we can help redeploy staff, as I say, instead of them having really mundane, tedious tasks that are kind of off-putting or really like the negative part of someone's job, we could take them and put them into something that's more interesting or exciting, or if it's got a high level of variation, generally people will be more engaged with that task anyway. Obviously, a main one at the minute, an important one with the cost of living crisis and that sort of stuff, is cutting costs. So there's the ability to do more with less time or with less staff, or instead of hiring a new member of staff, maybe stretching the team you've got by using technology to take on some of that workload. Again, more efficiency, we can optimize the process and the skill set once we've defined it. And again, kind of some of those factors will help lead to boosting morale and teamwork within your industry, within your company. And there's a few stats that kind of back that up there. So 94% of workers think they have a repetitive, time-consuming task in their role. If you have kind of staff members and they're they're constantly complaining or they're constantly like wanting to remove that task, automation is a perfect way of doing that, and then giving them kind of a better working environment. When it comes to process, 60% of businesses can save at least 30% of the time with real kind of easy automation. So obviously that can have a massive impact in how much work you can get through or your actual cost and your bottom line. And then this stat, I think, was from last year. The average saving was $46,000 when people had put in tools like Zapier, which is one we're gonna look at, and Microsoft Power Automate. So again, if you're spending a little bit of time either learning about it with people like me now or going away and trying this sort of stuff, there are the big advantages to be gained from having that. A couple of quick case studies from where we've developed things and kind of the impact it's had on that business that I can share with you. So KRS, plumbing and mechanical engineering company in the Midlands. They work just purely on new build sites, and they might handle 10, 15 different sites at any one time. And on those sites, there could be 50 houses, 100 houses on each site. So their admin overhead to manage all of the stock levels, their invoices, and all the billing related to each house, each plot, each site was becoming massive. Obviously, in a normal business, you might take on one new client and it would just give you one new kind of stream to manage. In their instance, a new site might mean they have to manage 100 plots on that site. So their actual growth is actually in big stages, and it's really hard for them to manage that. As a result, the kind of 3 office staff they had kind of just been lumbered with more and more work all the time, and it was getting harder and harder to do things. They didn't have enough time in the day. So one of the negative factors on that was that they were so busy inputting all this stuff into the systems that they weren't billing people on time, and the milestones that they were making and they were reaching when they should have been getting paid, they weren't getting paid on time because they weren't invoicing on time. So things that might not necessarily seem an obvious problem for them were resolved by this automation. So ultimately, we've created a system where all of their invoices and expenses for all the plots and the things they're buying for each site is automatically sent into their Microsoft email system. From there, there's a tool called Dext, which I'll explain a bit more about in the next slides, which uses OCR and AI to read all the amounts, and then it imports that directly into their account system. So rather than these 3 staff members, the office guys, having to spend tons and tons of time inputting all this with data entry, they now have one person that kind of oversees it, because the majority, sort of 99%, is done by the system. It just needs to be checked, or where there's an anomaly, they kind of manually correct that. So it's now one person's task. The other guys are now obviously redeployed in doing things that are actually growing the business and actually making sure that they're generating cash. So they're now able to invoice clients on time, every milestone's hit, and they're now paid as a result up to 30 days earlier because they're getting those invoices out the door quicker. So that was a sort of a good case study we did from the last year. Another one which is slightly different is we have a plant hire company, and again, they might have 250, 300 plant hire vehicles that they hire out. Keeping track of the maintenance for those vehicles, whether they were topped up with fuel, whether they were ready to get rented out, if they'd had their sort of safety inspections and all the materials and things with them, was becoming a nightmare. And they had a team of staff who had not necessarily been hired to do that job, but the role had just landed on their desk as the company had grown. And again, they had a similar thing where they struggled with invoicing, and the amount of time someone would turn up to pick up a vehicle and it wouldn't have fuel in it meant that they were then scrambling to either find fuel for it or they had to redeploy a different vehicle to site. It was a really inefficient process. So we've created a system for them with something called Power App and an automation that has daily quality checks and has almost like an MOT for every vehicle that gets ticked off, rather than it being cycled around a staff member that's randomly picked from a team. Everybody now in that team has something they're responsibility for, so either a vehicle or the fuel or whatever it might be. And the Power App, when somebody walks around that vehicle before it goes out and once it comes back, they literally have an iPad tick the things that have been done or needed. And rather than it go as a blanket email to that group, it knows that the fuel's responsible for being filled up by person X. So it sends that message and that kind of request with which device it is, which type of fuel it is straight to that person. So they've cut down in a lot of unnecessary communication. They're now no longer paper-based, so nothing gets lost. They don't have to store this paper. And as a result, their fleet is always ready to be collected. They never really now have the problem where somebody turns up and the machinery is not ready to go out, or it's not kind of ready to be loaded onto the site, or whatever it might be. So they literally maximize the full use of that fleet because they're never kind of having to keep spares or redundancy, which again is generate them additional income because they can rent out the full fleet. So a few kind of examples now that I wanted to just touch on of stuff that you might have already seen or you might have kind of been aware of are, we kind of work left to right on this. So Dragon, naturally speaking, for dictation and transcription is a form of AI and automation tool. You can basically talk into the computer and it will write for you. So in terms of like legal practices, we see this quite a lot where you might have secretaries that are constantly transcribing information. If that fee earner or that legal professional can literally transcribe it directly into the system, we can redeploy that secretary into doing another role. Actually, Microsoft Word will start doing this now, so you no longer need things like Dragon, but I think it's probably something people are aware of. Dext is a real quick win, and I'd recommend people look at Dext if you do have any manual process in your sort of accounts entry in your bookkeeping, because this is a tool we used in that case study I just mentioned for KRS. And I think it's $10, $20 a month. It's such a cheap, quick win for people. It basically plugs into your Microsoft email system. It plugs into your accounts package. So it'll work with Sage, Xero, and a few of the different other systems, QuickBooks and things like that. And it basically just takes that manual process of taking data from your invoices and your expenses that either get sent through the post or you get emailed, and it puts them straight into your accounts packages. HubSpot, obviously a CRM and sort of inbound marketing system. People might know of that. You can automate your sales and marketing process. So, for example, you guys that have all joined this webinar would have a contact created in a HubSpot system. I know what you're interested in. So when I come to do content or things in the future, it would automatically link you to an automation piece, and you guys will get notified about things we're doing. The green logo, which people might not be familiar with the logo at the minute, but is ChatGPT. If you haven't heard about this, I know it's been in the news a lot, but have a look at it, have a play with it. It's free at the moment, but it will become a premium or paid product at some point. But the difference between probably ChatGPT and some of the other bits, sorry, we've got a fire alarm going off. I think it's just a test, so I'll carry on. But yeah, so ChatGPT, the difference between this is it bridges the sort of gap between being able to communicate with it in a natural way and not having to be technical to program it. So for example, you can, I did give the example earlier about blogs and content. You can ask, can you write me a blog for everyone IT about automation for my next webinar? And it'll literally go away and it'll write that blog in seconds. But it'll write it with a kind of personalized, rather than it just being a kind of off-the-shelf content, they'll write it with the kind of input I've given it, and I don't have to worry about coding it. The other sort of things it can do, and maybe more relevant to kind of my industry, but we can ask it to write code. So when we program computers, ChatGPT can actually write some of the code for us. I'll just carry on going, even though the alarm's going off for now. MailChimp, email marketing, similar to HubSpot, and it can obviously work for automating sales campaigns and stuff like that. And then a few little bits that you might have known. Buffer, one for social media posting, does a similar thing. Siri is the last icon I've got there. And then another maybe nugget for you, Stainbox is something you've not heard of potentially, but it might be something worth looking at. And essentially what it does is email management. So it uses AI and automation to kind of make you more efficient with your time. When everybody signs up to things like this webinar, for example, you've got emails from me, you'll get emails from other marketing lists and things like that. Stainbox basically learns how you work and how you interact with email and your senders essentially, and it will create you a later inbox and then an important now inbox. So when you're looking at things that need to be done right now to maximize your time, you'll only see the things that are actually relevant to you or need action in. anything that it believes is not important or not time critical or marketing, it will put in a completely different mailbox. And the idea is that you just check that once a day. So you'll have a window of time where you check all those kind of for later emails, but then throughout your day, you kind of work through your important bits. And it tries to make you more task-based and block time driven with your kind of time. So rather than being constantly broken off, you can literally maximize time doing one task and not be kind of disrupted with other things. So I hope obviously you have heard of some of those or be using them, or at least kind of we can look at exploring them going forwards. What we'll do now is we'll move into the live demo part. I've broken it down to 3 sections. Obviously, people don't always know where to start. So I think the first section we'll cover is a basic workflow process template and why it's important to understand the process before we start automating it. As I say, once we understand the process and we've defined it and we've created the automation will never go wrong. It will never pick a bad choice. There'll never be an anomaly where something's been chosen wrong because we defined logic right at the start. Computers won't work on emotion. They'll literally do a yes or no, a 1 or a 0. So we'll always get the right output once we've defined that process. One thing I see is people are sometimes so eager to develop that automation and get started with the software that they don't fully think about all the ins and outs and the permutations at different stages. And then that's where you get problems. So we'll quickly look at that. I'll explain some things to look out for and how I do this when we work with clients. And then we'll use Zapier as a demo. So I've kind of got a demo ready for you where Zapier is a free tool. So they have premium plans and they have free plans. You can get started with Zapier straight away, straight after this kind of call. You don't need to understand programming or real kind of computer language to be able to use it. It's quite simple to use, and it integrates with, well, it says there are over 4,000 apps. So there'll be a way you can use this right now, and you can go get started with it straight away. And then we'll briefly talk about Microsoft Power Automate, which is the Microsoft kind of variant of Zapier. It's much more powerful. It can do sentiment analysis and things like that. We won't do a demo of it because it's quite intensive, but we can briefly talk about it. And if anybody wants to learn more about Power Automate, I'm happy to spend some time one-on-one after that. So to get started with best practice then, we'd always map this out. So this might be we start around in our sort of meeting room and our whiteboard and we draw the process out. We always want to start with our input and then with our output. From there, we'd work out the steps in between. I think it's important to realize that it's not always possible to automate an entire process, or at least straight away. So instead, once we have an understanding of a process and we've mapped it out in like in the example we've got here, we'd look at which elements we could automate. And it might be that we could automate the entire process for a simple process, but it might also mean that we could only do the first bit. So just quickly referring back to the KRS example and accounts, if we were to map out the entire process from taking invoices and bills in to billing, we haven't been able to automate that entire process. The step we have been able to automate is the invoices coming in and the expenses coming in to being sort of entered into the account system. From the point they're entered into the account system, it's still up to the staff then to go in and generate the invoices and to send them out and then to follow up for payment and that sort of stuff. Now, it might be we can go steps further in the future and we can do a bit more, but we'd rather work at a kind of evolution than a revolution. So if you're taking a really big process with multiple pieces and multiple elements, it's sometimes better just to do like kind of clean sprints rather than try and automate the whole thing in one go, unless you really understand it or unless you're really confident it's a simple process you can do in one hit. So what I would generally do is we start with an input and an output. We'd look at each step in between, and I'll show you on my next slide when we're going to look at this example we're actually going to sort of demo. At each step, I'd be not only putting what was involved, but I'd be putting kind of what data or elements we need to capture. If there's any triggers, so what might happen, who's responsible. So if you've got a process that spans across your team, who's responsible for each step. So again, it might be that we can just help one person with the automation in the first step, but then we'd look at different bits going forwards. But I think it's really crucial that unless you have this written out, and especially if it is a team kind of process, you've shared it with the team, because looking at things from a high level sometimes and not seeing it kind of boots on the ground, you don't always see some of the intricacies of what people do at each stage. You have to factor those in. Otherwise, if it gets to a point where you've not factored it in, the computer can't make a logical choice if it's not been predetermined. So if we can't program it to say, do this if this happens, and that scenario does occur and it doesn't know about it, it'll just carry on regardless. And then if it is a long process, you're going to carry those errors all the way through. So in terms of the demo I want to show you, and to make something kind of relevant for you guys, I've picked a Zapier, which again is really easy for you guys to access and use straight after this. And I've used the example of this basically marketing event, which ultimately is obviously me speaking to you. I've captured information. I can go on, we can speak. There's a potential that in the future we could work together. So you all booked the event through a Calendly link. So essentially my first step in this mapped out process here is I've had to create this Calendly event. I've had to understand what date I want to capture. So I've recorded that there. My output from that is I've got the event page and it's live. So I've got a URL which I've shared with you, or Megan and the guys that called around to kind of invite you to this have shared with you, which is how we found it. From there, we're into my actual automation. So what happens when a user signs up? So two outcomes I wanted ultimately. To manage the opportunity in our sales CRM system. So for that, I need to have captured your name, company name, email and phone. And then I need to know why you're in that CRM system. So it's pointless just having you recorded as a person. Why did you get there? What is relevant to you that then I can go on and use going forward? So for example, our system called Pipedrive, it records things as deals. I know they're opportunities, but the deals is the term they use. So not only does it add you to our CRM system, but it creates an opportunity called 100-hour webinar. So I know why you're there, I know what you were interested in, and if we have any follow-up, I know it's all relevant to you. The second thing I wanted to happen was I wanted an email to go out to our sort of marketing team so that everybody was aware of who's going to attend, what the details were. We had an idea of numbers, and again, going forwards, we know how to communicate with you going forward. So we kind of got a two-prong approach. So my second part of my automation is basically to capture similar information, but to send it to my team email address. So I'll briefly stop sharing this slide and instead share my screen, and we'll have a look at how this works in practice. Essentially, this is my Calendly event that I was discussing. So this is where I created my kind of event for you guys and some bits to pre-fill. My kind of middle bit, my automation, is done in this program called Zapier. So that's a Zap that I've created here. And then the output is this. So this is my sales CRM with my stages and how it would work. I'll just briefly demo it again so you can see how it works. So if I was to sign up exactly as you guys have, so I'll just pick a random date and time. If I was to just literally fill in this with, I'll put some different details in so we can see it pull through. So you guys filled in a similar form to this. Obviously, what should happen is I'll fill in and we'll press sign up. This Zap and automation will kick in. And then in here, another sign up deal will appear with the details that I've put in here. So test web, info art, and these bits. So if I click schedule, what's happening now is the attendee's been sent the link like you guys were. My Zap here has fired and triggered and bridged the gap between the two. And then in here, look, you can see I haven't had to refresh the screen or anything, but it's automatically added this second opportunity in. If I open that up, you'll see that it's captured that info, details that I put in, and then it's created this 100-hour test as well. So from a kind of time perspective, of course, I could manually type everybody's information in this, but by spending the time to create this little automation now, I can forever make use of that when anybody signs up to not just this webinar, but other webinars. Because I've used the kind of name of the webinar as a test, you'll see the opportunities always pop up with that kind of stuff. So sorry about that. I'll start kind of breaking this down again then. So how does the Zap work, and what did it do? How did I make it do it? So Zapier, really easy. You can create by kind of drag drop. You don't have to understand code. There are some elements to it where you can put in code or switches and things like that, but most of the basic Zaps you could create, the automations, are just done purely through kind of a drag and drop with no code. So I'll just break down the one I've done, and then I'll show you the process of how you could create kind of your own Zaps. So this is the workflow of the automation, and it will mirror the kind of the workflow we looked at before that I gave you as my example. So my trigger, if I open this up, was that a new invitee has been created. So somebody's signed up. So the app it's connected to for that is the Calendly, which is a system I use to create the event page. And my trigger, so the action that's going to drive this automation, is somebody signed up to the event. Moving to the next step, then what happens with that information that's captured? So it's going to go into my sales system, this Pipedrive system, and it's going to create that person's record first of all. So Pipedrive is the name of the software I used. The action is going to be it creates a person, and then how is it going to map the fields? So you can see here it's going to mirror. So in all the Pipedrive fields, I've picked the appropriate Calendly field, and I'll show you how this works in a second. It's literally you pick from a drop-down list. So it moves through there. We then move into creating the opportunity. So to do that, I'm going to find the newly created person in my CRM by using your email address. And then once I've done that, I'm going to create that opportunity, which is that event here. So just move it. In there, I've used the event name as the type, and we've then done the sign up is the stage it goes into, and it's matched up with that person. So to get to that point, it's then fully automated this process. If you remember, there was another step to my automation, which was I wanted to email the team, the marketing team, so everybody knew what was happening and people were aware who was signing up and how many people were and that kind of stuff. So if you look back at this, I then had a second action, which is to send an email. So this is like sort of a really simple one. Zapier has its own email facilities and things like that. So basically my event is literally as soon as this happens and we've gone through and created it, I want to send an email, and where should it go? So I've just for a test, I've put it into info app. So the whole team get it. They know who's turning up. And then again, what does the email look like? So that's in the subject line. So everybody knows what event it's for. This is the contact details of the person that's sort of arriving. So that's an overview of it. I'll quickly show you a edit section of it where you can see the kind of steps in certain elements as well. So what I'll do is I'll delete that last section and I'll actually just redo that so you can see the step. So you can see here, I've got my kind of steps before that we spoke about. To add the next step or the next part of the automation, I'd literally click the plus. And now here's where you can see all the different types of apps it works with. So depending on what it is I want to use, I presume you can just type in. So we talked about Dex briefly earlier. I can just find Dex from this list. I can click it and then it will start a connection to Dex. Obviously, you have to enter any credentials for Dex or anything like that while you're doing it. And then once it's connected the first time, it'll remember those. But for the action we want, obviously I want it to email out. So I'm going to click email by Zapier. And then I'm going to choose my event. So what do I want? Obviously it's to send an email. And you can see how like intuitive this is and how I've not had to code anything. I'm literally just picking from drop downs. So my action is it's going to send, but what do I want? What should go in my email? So for example, anywhere where I want to use a kind of static. So I always want to send this email to info at everyone. So rather than pick from kind of predetermined fields that we've collected from either you guys or Pipedrive, I'm actually going to type in where I want it to go because this action is never going to change. Depending on who comes through or where you come through, it doesn't matter. I'm always going to send this email to info at everyone. So my subject line, what do I want it to say? In here, I could type 100-hour workshop. The problem with that is if I reuse this automation for, let's say, a 10-hour workshop as a title, it's not going to be transferred across. It's always going to have what I put in. So instead, I'm going to insert data from here. So they're different. You can see every time in the automation it's connected to an app, it's pulled in some alerts and some triggers. So I'm going to use the event type name. So all I'm doing is I'm clicking the source where I want to come through, and then I'm just going to click it. And you see that's pre-filled it in there. So if I do this and create another calendar event with a completely different name, but I've used this field as my subject line, the subject line will dynamically change and update every time we use it. I won't have to constantly update the automation to keep it up to date. And then secondly, what do I want in the email? So I could type in, hi, team. So that bit will always stay the same, but then I can choose any fields that I want. So what's the person's name? They don't necessarily need to know the event because it's in the subject title. If anything isn't in there, like there's a phone number, for example, that's not shown on the top bit, we can look at all options. And again, this shows you a full list of all the fields and all the data is connected to calendar with. So again, if I want to know what company they've come from, I can add that in there. And I can just literally pre-populate the email with a mix of things that I can type in that are static and things that are generated by that different action. The way to kind of, again, use this and to interact with it is to make sure that anything that's picked applies to this automation, regardless of what happens. And that links back to having your workflow properly defined right at the start. So you know your inputs, you know your outputs, and know your requirements at each stages. So I can literally pre-populate this, like we could put attachments, we could kind of do all this different stuff. But essentially, once I've got it as I want it and I click continue, on every step of Zapier, on every different element, before it'll let you move to the next, there's a test action. So if I click test action, it'll come back and tell me, obviously, what's happened here. So I can see this has worked. And then if I haven't got my email open, but if I looked at my email, I would see a copy of that test email. I can see who it's come from, and I can see all the other kind of stuff. So from there, if we've got all the stages in that we want, it's a case of publishing the Zap. Obviously, this is a new version because we've just tweaked it, so I'll just put beta on the end. And from there, it's live. No matter who signs up to which event on Calendly and how it works, this Zap now will forever take people from signups. It'll create them in my sales CRM. It'll then create a deal for them, but then it'll email the team so we know we've got a new person. If ever I decide that I want to change the process, we could do exactly what I've just done. We can edit it and create different versions. If I ever decide that actually I don't, it's not working for me anymore, I can turn the Zap off, which means the automation is still there, pre-programmed and ready. It's just not live and working. And that's useful sometimes if you're testing different things. So you could A/B test an automation versus a manual process, and you could do week to week, for example, and things like that. Other sort of things you can do are you can see the history. So if you really understand the process and you really understand each element in each stage, you should never get any zaps or automations that have errors. But if there's something you haven't quite understood or you're not accounted for in your automation and it falls over and there's a failure, you'll see it listed in here, and you can basically, obviously there isn't any for mine right now, but it'll show you the event and what happened and why it failed. So you can go back in and either then redevelop the automation to kind of fix the issue, or you can take steps out, or depending on what it is you need to do, you can see all of that through there. So that kind of gives you an overview. I'll send a recap, obviously, for everyone to show them links to Zapier, and you can sign up and you can have a play with things like that. I'll just briefly reshare my presentation, and then we'll kind of recap just briefly Power Automate, and then we kind of recap. And if you've got any questions, obviously I can answer them then as well. So just briefly, obviously that was the process we created. Calendly event was a manual thing I did once because I'd have to do that each time I create a new event because my inputs might be different. But my Zapier and my automation starts here, and then that bit is always consistent. So we created the deal in Pipedrive with the contact, and then we created the email to get fired off to everyone. Right, so Power Automate, just briefly, is Microsoft's offering. Similar to Zapier, it can do a lot more. So it has sentiment analysis and things like that in there. So not only can it make logical decisions based on like rules, but for example, it could span your emails for if you had a customer service email address that was for like reviews and things like that. It can analyze sentiment of emails or communications that pass through it. So it could do a different action on a negative email to a positive one. So if you're constantly getting great reviews and there's no action needed, it can just let stuff fly through. If you get a really negative email or review where you need a human touch, a bit like I mentioned earlier, somebody needs to go in and resolve that kind of problem for a client, you can have an automation kick in because it's read the sentiment of that email and it's alerted your customer service team. So they need to go through and do sort of makeup or whatever it is you need to do to resolve that situation. It connects with tons and tons of apps similar to Zapier. Most people already have it within the Microsoft 365 plans you might already buy. Sort of the majority of the world uses Microsoft 365, and Power Automate is already integrated in that. And it's only going to become more integrated as time passes. So you probably already have access to it. The main difference I'd say between that and Zapier is there is a steeper learning curve. So it's not as friendly from a non-technical perspective or non-programming language perspective. There's some elements that you do need to understand PowerShell script for and different things like that. But they do also offer a templated service as well. So if your exact automation fits a predefined template, you can actually just import that from the Microsoft catalog and just plumb in your endpoints and not have to worry about the in-between. So it can have some use straight away, but if you've never done any automation, Zapier might be a better place to start and then to progress to Power Automate as you go. If you're doing a large-scale automation, Power Automate is probably the better platform to start with. But I think you kind of would dip your toe in your water and move through that. So if you, obviously, I hope you kind of, your minds are kind of getting started on thinking of different ways and different processes you can automate. But I'll put together 5 ideas of things that I think you could start with. So Dext and your automation of entry of receipts and invoices is a really quick win. It's no code. You just sign up to Dext. There's a trial plan. It works with all your accountancy kind of common systems, Sage, QuickBooks, Xero, that kind of stuff. And it can be a real quick win and a big time saver for a manual process. And then a few others that I've kind of got where we've done things for people in the past or might be a bit more creative. So if people use a Microsoft Planner and the to-do list, but they struggle to keep track of maybe the team's activities or their activities, you can create a list of up-and-coming tasks and events and have that sent to team leaders and things like that once a week, once a month. You could automatically convert Word files into PDF. So we use this a lot with within the legal sector that we work with. Obviously, all the kind of letters and all that kind of stuff's done on Word or a kind of Word editor, but when it's sent to clients in a digital format, it always has to be in a PDF. The amount of time that it takes for a person to just be continuously printing stuff to PDF, if you imagine one Word file might take 10, 15 seconds, but if you're doing thousands of these a week, that time adds up. So we have an automation in Power Automate where you save the Word file into a folder and then it automatically runs in the background and converts it to a PDF for you, so it's ready to be sent. So that's kind of one the legal guys use kind of lots. The new leads in your CRM, really similar to the process I just did. Again, anywhere where there's manual data entry and duplication, just use something like Zapier to do it. And then the one I didn't mention, I think, was creating a task in Planner. So again, with Power Automate, because it can analyze sentiment and text a bit better than Zapier, if you are tagged in an email that says, I need this by a certain date, for example, or you agree to something in written text on a certain date, then Microsoft AI can actually realize that there's a task from that. And you might even see it now when you get an email and it might say create event. I know your iPhone and things like that do it a lot. If you get sent a date in an email, you can click it and it literally will create the event for you. This is a step further and it'll read the communication. And if it thinks there's an action for you, you can then automatically create a task in Microsoft To Do or Planner, depending which system you use, that then creates that. So depending on your structure, it might be more worthwhile where you've got teams of people that manage a shared mailbox, or a shared email system, like a customer service one again, or sales. You could literally automatically have those calendar invites or those kind of prompts put into a task system that can then be assigned and divvied out, rather than leaving it to chance that somebody's going to look at it and read it. So there are a few things. Obviously, you can go a lot further than that, but hopefully I give you a flavour of the sort of things you can do to get started. So then, just for a bit of recap, the reason we do this and the reason I'm talking to you about it right now is we believe that IT is kind of becoming more commoditized as the cloud and systems become more offboarded and offloaded from your kind of on-site structure and your on-premise devices. Things like IT support are going to be less worthwhile or less relied upon, because the cloud's going to manage some of that infrastructure for you. You're going to have less problems because it's always up to date and somebody else is already essentially managing it. So for that reason, we believe IT support and things like that are going to become really commoditized. You still need it, but the service is going to basically just become a real basic, cheap service just to keep the lights on. And as a result, we believe that the value in companies like us and IT partners like us is in these three other areas. So training around new technology and adoption of technology. So it's all well and good creating an automation or creating a system, but if nobody knows how to interact with it, you've fallen at the first hurdle. So training is a big one. Obviously, cybersecurity you see everywhere. And again, as systems become more and more digital, there's more and more risk with having data in there. So cybersecurity is going to be forever, I think, growing. And business improvement / automation is where we can hopefully bridge a gap between what you currently do and how you use technology, and then what's available and what's coming. So we have, I'm going to just share the next slide, which shows, we call it the Everon Way. These are our sort of core values. And essentially the reason I'm mentioning them is they perfectly lend themselves to automation and to being at the forefront of technology. So we literally always want to be transparent and trustworthy. We're always approachable, so we have that personal touch. But then we're at the forefront of technology because we're always thinking we're have a good understanding of your business, so we can marry it up with the right technology. And we're always willing to kind of be better and things like that. So I think that kind of wraps up everything I was going to run through. I have obviously some time for questions. I don't know if anybody's got anything specifically they'd want to discuss. We also have a bit of an offer off the back of this webinar where if you want to get started with an automation, you can book a session for that special price of $210, where we'll basically develop your workflow process, and then we'll also get started with creating that initial automation for you.